What diseases are so terrible to have that dying would be preferable? Before we start with the first story, please hit subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. There's that one where your soft tissue heals into bone. So as you get injured, your body solidifies, bit by bit. I have a friend who has something similar. It's called ankylosing spondylitis. It's a rheumatic disease that causes joints in the bones to slowly fuse. She has lived with it for over 10 years, and this week she is going to get her maid medical assistance in dying because her quality of life has degraded so much. I am so sad to be losing her, but I am glad for her that she does have to continue to live in pain. Story 2. ALS, mentally still there, but slowly, your body says F this. My father died of ALS several years ago. It was awful. My mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's last week. It feels so very unlucky and unfair. E.T., thank you for all your well wishes. I'm hopeful I get many more good years with my mom. It's early yet. But Dad was gone less than 18 months after diagnosis. He had the fast-moving ALS that starts in the chest, which I find to be less horrible than the slow crawl usually associated with the disease. I still don't know which I find worse, losing your body and keeping your mind, or losing your mind but keeping your body. Story 3. My old neighbor had ALS. The only thing he noticed was a trembling in his right pinky which wouldn't stop or go away. At first he thought it was something like a spasm or stress readed, but it wouldn't go away, and when he finally had it checked out a half year later, the diagnosis was ALS. Super sad since he was in his mid-30s and had 2 young kids. Seeing a guy who was fit as can be, he ran multiple marathons per year, slowly turned into a vegetable, sorry I have no other word for it, was heartbreaking. He managed to live for a couple of years, but in the end he decided the quality of life had become so bad that he decided to undergo euthanasia, which, fortunately for him in his situation, is a legal option in the Netherlands. Story 4. Radiation exposure and poisoning. There was a case of radiation poisoning in Japan in 1999, where the patient was deteriorating, disintegrating on the hospital bed for 83 days after radiation exposure. His skin and internal organs broke down. He had diarrhea and dehydration. Blood was leaking from his eyes. He was leaking fluids. He could no longer eat after 2 weeks. And they couldn't administer anything intravenously due to his tissue and cells being unable to repair or even hold themselves together. He had regular heart attacks as well, to which he was revived frequently. The patient's name was Hisashi Uchi. Story 5. When most people think of the atomic bombs dropped on Japan, they think of people being vaporized instantly, but many if not most of the people who died as a direct result of the blast survived the initial impact event. According to reports of people who entered the area, some tried to walk to get help or to a hospital, as their skin was falling off until they collapsed to die on the ground. The people who survived only to die in the days, weeks, and months after had a horrific death. I wish that the film Oppenheimer didn't just make a reference of people being instantly obliterated, but the torturous agony of surviving while your body decays. The reports are not for the faint of heart, and if an atomic bomb was dropped in this age where you could get video of that kind post-blast horror, it would probably give you shell shock just seeing it. Story 6. Alzheimer's. This. My father is currently deep into Alzheimer's territory, and it's awful to witness. I've already had the chat with my partner as there's no way I'm allowing her or my kids to go through that. That said, there's been news of a new drug that holds it at bay for longer, so there's always hope on the horizon. I hold on to the fact that there is literally no illness human ingenuity and skill can't conquer with enough time. He used to be a doctor and saw it coming. He always said he will off himself before he lets it get too far. Of course, he never gotten around to remembering that, and now he's just a shell of himself sitting in a care home. Story 7. Locked-in syndrome. I once treated a young man with this. I have to be careful about revealing too many details, but he was a gunshot victim whose family refused to let him die because they were waiting for a miracle. So the patient just rots away day by day, unable to move any part of his body, but with his mind intact. Oh, and the worst part of it? He can still cry. And I saw him cry when I took care of him. And that's the day I went home and told my wife to never let me linger if I didn't have quality of life anymore. This one is terrible. Some of these patients feel pain and are unable to complain or express. I had one patient with locked-in syndrome before. She was unable to move anything except her eyes. She later developed cholecystitis, which we only found out about only after requesting a bunch of labs and imaging. If I were her, I would want to die immediately. Story 8. Tetanus. Get a deep cut from something with Clostridium tetani, not just rusty nails, literally anything that has been in direct contact with contaminated soil like ever on it, and you're not vaccinated? Enjoy your unpredictable spasms so violent, they can literally fracture bone. Not as bad as, say, rabies, since you can survive tetanus so much more reliably, but boy howdy, will you wish you didn't. Story 9. Huntington's disease. I was a community carer for 2 years and had a client who had Huntington. Even in the year and a half I worked with her, the speed with which she deteriorated was frightening. After her symptoms started about 5 YRs earlier, she had been declining faster and faster. And her family, I get it was hard, I get she didn't want to go into a care home. But her 25-year-old daughter, who was raising her own child, and was confirmed to have the gene, was trying to care for her mom too, and that was just unfair. And you could tell when she'd reached the end of her rope with that. Sounds awful, but I hope she's passed away by now. I hope her suffering is over. Story 10. My dad had Huntington's, and I live in a country where euthanasia is legal. He got approved for it very early on, when he was still able to live alone at home. At the time, I was young and afraid of developing the disease myself, and had already lost my mom, and I begged him to not do it quite yet. He decided to stick around for another year. Looking back, I am grateful I got to spend lots of time with him that year and say goodbye, but he suffered a lot that year and declined rapidly. If I would get to do it again, I would support his decision earlier and be less clouded by my own selfishness. Fast forward a few years, I have gotten tested, and I luckily will not develop it. My brother was not as lucky, however. He already wrote up a document with his doctor about at which point he wants to step out. I am committed to supporting him whenever he feels it is time. I cannot imagine how much suffering is involved when there is not an option to end on your own terms. Story 11. EB or butterfly syndrome. Skin so fragile you can't touch it, like the wings of butterflies. Constant bandaging which can cause the tears and blisters that it's trying to protect from. Constant worry about infection and what body part is going to be mutilated from scarring. Constant severe pain. In some cases, it affects the digestive system, respiratory system, urinary system, and genitals. It can be fatal in cases where scar tissue or blisters have destroyed organs or left the areas too narrow to function: lungs, esophagus, and, obviously, sepsis. Another thing is that children with epidermolysis bullosa (EB) often just want to enjoy normal childhood activities. However, their appearance and the need for extra care can make other kids scared or hesitant around them, which can be so challenging and disheartening because kids with EB are just like any other kids and want to be treated as such. Also, I grew up with a family friend with EB, and I was that scared kid, and when he died when I was around 12, I still to this day regret not spending more time with him when all he wanted to do was sit on the couch with me and play Super Monkey Ball. Story 12. Parkinson's disease. My mom was diagnosed with it in 2004, and 20 years later, she's in stage 5, which is the last stage. Mom went from being able to walk, drive, cook, standing long periods of time, dressing herself, using the toilet and doing everything on her own, to being bedridden with atrophied legs, unable to hold an eating implement to feed herself, and having to be changed when she soils herself. It is awful, and I don't wish it on anyone. I was lucky to have her at my wedding 4 months ago, and days after my wedding, she ended up in the hospital, and she's now in a nursing home. My dad is currently setting up Medicaid to have her there permanently due to her condition worsening. It kills me seeing her in that bed, unable to move or do anything. She can still speak, and she still has her loving heart and sense of humor intact. It's a very hard pill for me to swallow, knowing that she's probably going to pass away one day in this facility from natural causes due to PD. It breaks my heart because she probably won't be part of my sister's wedding if she ever finds a man and settles down, or my brother's wedding if he marries one day. I don't know how my dad will be able to handle losing my mom because he loves her so much, and they've been married almost 39 years. Story 13. Severe myalgic encephalomyelitis, also known as chronic fatigue syndrome. Research has proven beyond reasonable doubt that it's a serious medical condition with bleak prospects of recovery. But most people think it just means you're a bit tired or lazy, and it has a tortured history of being misclassified as a psychological illness. Severe sufferers have a miserably limited existence with constant pain and inflammation throughout the body, particularly the brain. There are only a small number of experts in the condition, and most medical professionals are ignorant about it and will gaslight patients. The public at large have no sympathy. Many folk who've had other serious illnesses, including cancer, say the lived experience with severe ME/CFS is far worse. Story 14. Chronic regional pain syndrome, colloquially known as the disease. There are two types, CRPS types I, and second. Type 2 is the much bigger brother, and is also known as causalgia instead of fibromyalgia. How painful is it? In the US, we grade pain on a 1 to 10. McGill University and its associated hospital in Canada created a pain index that goes to 50. The index ranks causalgia as the most painful thing a human can experience, more painful than the most painful cancer, more painful than a traumatic amputation. The pain doesn't go away in hours, days, or weeks. It's chronic, constant, 24/7, 365 for the rest of the causalgia patient's life. At its rare, most advanced stage, it's the only pain known to science as sympathetic independent pain. All other pain known to medical science is sympathetic mediated pain, which means it can be reduced or eliminated with medication. Causalgia can't, not with morphine or fentanyl, or any other medication. Story 15. Epilepsy. I currently have mild cognitive impairment. You can even call it that. I can forget the content of a video I watched the previous night. My right shoulder has been dislocated 14 times from experience. It is more painful than a broken rib. But I am not a candidate for surgery because I have breakthrough seizures. And one of the medications I'm on is a sloshed drunk simulator that also gives me dreams based on real life that are so vivid that I wake up disoriented. Oh, and I think it also worsens memory too. Epilepsy eventually leads to dementia, and I'm only 23. Physically, I'm lucky that I've only had dislocated shoulders, a broken rib, painful canker sores from biting my tongue that make it hard for me to enjoy my favorite foods, and a scar underneath an eyebrow from when I had a tonic-clonic seizure when I lived at a place where the bathtub was in front of the toilet. A piece of advice for all of you: screaming will not move you up the triage list or speed up the process of your treatment when you are in the ER. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like this, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below.